everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Congressman Tim Burchett. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, ma'am.
I'm really excited to dive into what you do know and what you can tell us about a briefing that you were involved in yesterday. All members of the House were briefed by officials in the Trump administration on Venezuela and the operation that led to the capture of the country's sitting leader, Nicolás Maduro. I know it was classified, so you can't get into the specific details here of that meeting. You did say, though, from what you learned, it was a masterful operation. Aside from that, what other takeaways did you have from that meeting?
Just the precision that our military does. I think it's a different style of leadership under Biden. There's not a micromanaging. You got Trump, who understands the military and understands that the mental capacity that they have for on the ground thinking that literally can save lives. And you don't need somebody in the White House micromanaging every move they make. And I think that's what Trump did, and that's why I think our military is so successful, because they've told our leaders in the military and our branches of the military that they, in fact, will be given a little more freedom. I think that's even been quoted more or less in the press, and I think that showed because they did some pretty extraordinary things, and I think it just, and I think it has repercussions throughout the world. I think Cuba sees that they're going to be on the chopping block. Not necessarily we're going to invade them, but that the funding and the flowing of terrorist dollars, things like that, will not be coming to them. China was looking at a partnership with Maduro, obviously, for an invasion of Taiwan. I think you'll see that push back. I think it also clamps down on Russia. Now there's word out that Putin sent word to Trump, if you give us free reign in Ukraine, you can have free reign in Venezuela, kind of thing, which is, you don't tell somebody like Trump that. He say, I'll take Venezuela and Ukraine. I mean, he doesn't, that was just, but there's a lot that went on behind the scenes. And something there too that struck me, just by the grace of God. I mean, a miracle that no Americans lost their lives. You think that big of an operation, somebody's going to fall off a truck, somebody's going to step in front of a plane, somebody's going to, get hit just with friendly fire even. But yet no Americans lost their dadgum lives. To me, that was incredible. And it'll come out later, but just some of the incredible bravery by our military is pretty astounding.
I think a lot of Americans were struck by the fact that not a single American life was lost in this entire operation. And I am aware this was classified. You can't get into the specifics here. But was that because, do you think, that U.S. forces caught Maduro and Venezuela in general by complete surprise during that operation?
Yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of this whole operation. The intelligence was they knew a lot. They knew a lot of personal information, and it's just, they knew where he would be, and they knew how to get him the fastest. And to me, that's just, and the secrecy too. The left was raising Cain about it, but if you'd have told them, they'd have run out the door. I always remember when I first got to Congress, and I was in a classified briefing, and I said to an old Democrat, I said, so let me get this straight. If I miss this meeting, I can probably catch it on the news in 20 minutes. And he winked at me and said, more like 10 minutes, Tim. And I said, okay, I get it. And you watch folks after. I watched some of my Democrat colleagues after a meeting. I watched one of them when I first got elected. I remember a lady reporter came up, and she was complimenting me on everything about how well I was dressed and how well received I was and all this. And then I turned to her and I said, ma'am, I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to tell you anything. And she just literally did a 180, and there was a Democrat, and she saw him, and then they went down a fire escape. And I remembered thinking, Well, there's her leak. She knew which buttons to push, and she didn't know with me, and never attempted that with me again.
But I think people can get what you're thinking based on your Twitter, because I think you are so transparent in recording yourself. You're walking, you're talking. It seems like you tell it like it is. And I do want to talk about more the secrecy behind this operation. I know you said that the U.S. forces had a lot of intelligence here. Does Congress know exactly how U.S. forces knew exactly where Maduro was?
No, that is classified. They could know. They could request it to go into a skiff and be briefed on that, or possibly read some files. But there again, Congress doesn't need to know that. I think Congress is on a need to know on some of that stuff, but especially prior to it. Now afterwards, that's a different thing. But you would risk informants' lives and possibly people that were still there, and so I just don't think that'd be appropriate.
And I'm always grateful for my conversations with you over the years, with other members of Congress. I spoke with two of your colleagues about this classified briefing, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, as well as Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks. And based on those conversations, it seemed like they were sitting in two separate meetings. That was based on the tone and tenor of how they described them. Congresswoman Miller Meeks said she left the meeting feeling reassured that there's not going to be U.S. boots on the ground in Venezuela. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she said she didn't know how Congresswoman Miller Meeks could get to that conclusion. Where are you in all of that? Based on what you heard, do you think there's going to be U.S. troops on the ground in Venezuela?
Ultimately, it's going to be up to President Trump. And I don't think that's where he's leaning right now. I don't think. But to say there's no troops on the ground, ma'am, there have been troops on the ground there since before I was born in that area. Maybe not necessarily in that country, but they're all over Central America. Most of these knuckleheads up here couldn't name half the countries that we're in. We're in, I don't know, one time we were in over 100 countries, our military was. So a lot of people are just misinformed, and they like pushing those buttons. And it's a partisan thing. I think the Democrats are just angry that another, another left winger was taken out. But you got to realize, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris put a $15 million bounty, and then they put a $25 million bounty on this guy. I mean, they're paper tigers. Trump puts a $50 million on it and has him arrested. So I think it's and there's clearly two different Americas right now, and a group that supports law and order and a group that doesn't. And I think there's going to be a clear divide in this country. I think there's people that really do want to destroy this country, and I'm not one of them.
When you're looking at what's next specifically for Venezuela, Maduro is now out. President Trump says the United States is going to run Venezuela until we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. Did this meeting, or did any conversations with your congressional colleagues or members of the Trump administration clarify exactly the United States' involvement in Venezuela post Maduro being out?
I think the president has kind of left that open, really. He's not, the troops on the ground, folks were saying that early on, and I haven't, any of our conversation, anybody from the White House hasn't been that, and I'm on foreign affairs, they would probably tell us that. And I think that there is a democratically elected president there that should be there, and I think we're going to let the process play out in a Democrat. And sure, there'll be folks there watching the elections, but it's primarily their own people. They're the freedom-loving people of Venezuela. They're going to let them do their thing, and I'm happy for them.
I'm curious if you have any concerns surrounding Venezuela's new interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. She was Maduro's vice president. President Trump called Maduro an outlaw dictator. He was an authoritarian leader who didn't legitimately win the election. Rodriguez is sanctioned by the United States. I mean, what makes her different than Maduro? Is this just a new face? What do you make of the Trump administration working with her?
I think it's all we got. I think she better realize where they'll take her out too. If they can take her thug president out, they can sure take her out, and her own people might take her out. So I think she's on notice, And I would be surprised if she stayed in power. Honestly, would. I would think that she would probably be escorted off by her own people.
And I know that Speaker Johnson said this isn't a regime change. This is about a change of behavior in a regime. What do you think that the Trump administration needs to do to ensure there is that change of behavior?
I think economic support. The most powerful thing we have is our fighting men and women. The second most is obviously our economic support. And I think Trump realizes that. And I think that they're pitching a fit about him seizing these tankers. And the reality is those tankers are going to fuel their economy. And capitalism and democracy is what our State Department ought to be promoting, not drag shows and all this craziness they have been supporting. So I would hope that maybe our State Department would get in the game and do what's right.
And I know that President Trump said to the New York Times in an interview that the United States could be involved in Venezuela and overseeing the government for years now. Is that something that you're interested in, that the United States is involved in a foreign government for an undetermined amount of time? Would you want some timelines on here? Would you want a stricter date and outline set in place? I know that the capture of Maduro only happened less than a week ago, but is there a time that you want an out date by?
Of course, I want a timeline, but I don't know how you'd put one in. I think the economic situation is what's got to turn, and you got to get the country back employed, and you got to get democracy back in, and you got to have justice, and there's got to be law and order. You've had a dictator that's imprisoned people, that starved people, that ran hundreds of thousands of people off. So I think when those people start coming back in, the investment starts coming back in, I think you'll see it turn. But if we were just to turn it loose, I think the Chinese or someone else could probably get in there and mess it up, and we would be in worse shape. So there's going to be a settling process, but I don't think it's going to be a lifetime.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio described this threefold process when it comes to Venezuela. Step one was stabilization, and he said that the United States would be controlling the sale of up to 50 million barrels of oil. Then the next step would be recovery, and then the final step would be transition. When you're looking at that final step of transition, did he explicitly say in that meeting or otherwise that this would be a transition to democracy?
I didn't hear that. I guess that's just implied, because we wouldn't export communism, and we would not export totalitarianism, which is what they've had a hybrid of that in the past. So, I mean, that's just implied. That's just where we're headed. We've had a bad habit of messing in things we shouldn't have in the past and leaving it in worse shape. But as this turns out, this was in bad shape. I don't see it could get much worse. So I think once democracy has its say, I think it's going to work out very well. And I suspect it'll happen a lot faster than a lot of the critics think it will.
Do you have any insight into how fast exactly that would happen, or how fast you would hope that would happen?
No, if I did, I wouldn't be in Congress, ma'am. I'd probably be on Wall Street.
I hear you. President Trump, though, posted that in light of these, quote, very troubled and dangerous times, the 2027 U.S. military budget should be $1.5 trillion. And this is up significantly from the $900 billion it was in 2026. And in March, you and I had a conversation, and you took issue with the increase in defense spending. You said that there was, at the time, a lot of waste in the Pentagon. What are your thoughts on this increase in the military budget?
I still have concern about it. I always will. You've got a lot of, in Congress, you have a lot of, they're war pimps. I mean, they love war. It's good. They're portfolio warriors, ma'am. And old men make decisions and young men die. And I don't want to see any more young men die. I would like to see us have some restraint. I don't know how we do it. With this bunch up here, the Democrats and the Republicans, they can't get out of their own way by throwing money at the military. When I was up here, forget how much the Pentagon asked for one year, but the Congress gave them more money than they asked for that year. You know, it just never ends until there's some accountability. But when 12% of the population goes to the polls, that's what you're going to get. And maybe the money is needed, but I would prefer it be spent on what we need, and not what we don't need.
I know that you said you don't have a crystal ball, and if you could predict, you'd be on Wall Street and not in Congress. But do you think that this indicates that there could be a war in Venezuela between the United States and Venezuela just because that he wants this increase? Or do you think that that's just out of the question?
I mean, there's always that option, but I just don't see it. I don't see their will to fight. I think their will to die is what you would see, because if you see any of the footage of their military, you're talking about 1970s technology, and we're not playing around anymore with this White House. They're not going to play around, and you'll see the full might, and you'll see our technological advance on display if somebody tries this president.
And my final question to you is the Senate advanced a bipartisan war powers resolution that would block President Trump from further military action in Venezuela unless he received congressional authorization. What do you make of that, and would that be something you support?
No, I thought that was pretty worthless and pretty gutless on their part. Constitution's pretty aware. We don't need a bunch of portfolio warriors up here voting. That's what they're voting for, and that it's not an act of war. It was Maduro's killed more Americans through his drug smuggling and terrorist funding than we lost in the Vietnam War, and shame on the Senate. That's pitiful.
I know that you don't need an answer for every Republican's opinion, obviously, but Senator Rand Paul said this: "Make no mistake, bombing another nation's capital and removing their leader is an act of war, plain and simple. No provision in the Constitution provides such power to the presidency." I'm assuming that you disagree with him, correct?
I do. It's within the presidential powers of what he did to make that strike. You wait on Congress, they're just going to call Maduro his people. These people up here are not for America. A lot of them are, not most of them, but some of them. And the Democrat Party has shown that they support anarchy, they support drug dealers, they support terrorism. They blocked a bill in the Senate to defund the Taliban. We're sending $40 million a week. The Senate Democrats blocked it. And so it's imperative that America wakes up and realizes what's going on in this two-party system. There is one party that is apparently against everything that we stand for.
I mean, that's quite the charge. Have you said that to a Democrat's face, and what's the response there?
Yeah, they just laugh. Everybody up here is just trying to get reelected, ma'am. You got a percentage of people that want to do the right thing, and you got a percentage of people that they don't care. All they want is to be reelected and have this fancy office and that fat paycheck. That's all it's about.
Well, Congressman, I always appreciate our conversations. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, ma'am. It's been a great pleasure. You have a great day.